Wrap up our series that's been titled This Is Us. And as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, I completely ripped that title off from the show on Netflix. So I figure, full disclosure, I can't be blamed for it. But it's a series that is stepping a bit beyond the curtain. And as a church, our focus is that we want to lead people to Jesus. Because we believe that He is the one who gives a sense of abundance in life. He is the one who gives us identity. He is the one who gives us hope and joy and peace. And so we want to continue to lead more and more people to know Jesus and to at least consider Jesus. But that's all fine and dandy to say. That's all fine to believe. But the question we've been pushing back on a little bit the last couple of weeks is, what does that start to look like? What does it start to feel like? To put it another way, what is the culture? What is the environment that we are creating in our own lives, in our homes, and ultimately in this church? So that when people come, they may know very little about Jesus or very, very little about God, but there's this environment that we have created that likely is going to do one of two things. It will either draw them in or push them away. Right? Environments do that. I'm sure you've all had the circumstance of the situation. I really hope that this isn't your circumstance. But have you ever stepped into someone's home and things just seem off? They don't really seem to like to be in the same room with one another. They're kind of always biting at each other. There's not really this sense of encouragement. And you step into the home and you're around this family and you're almost like, listen, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening, but I want to get my exit plan together now, right? Hopefully that's not your house. But then if you've been on the other side, have you ever been on the flip side where you step into someone's home and even though you're not part of their family, you immediately feel like you are? It's as if you want to be there. There's this sense of encouragement. There's this sense of support. There's this sense of love. And they treat you just like you belong. And you kind of want to stay a little longer. You look forward to the opportunity to be around them. As we think of the culture, of the environment that we are creating, I'm pretty sure all of us would stand up and say, we want scenario 2 to be known about this place, not scenario 1. Right? When people come through the doors and they're like, oh my goodness, let's get the heck out of Dodge as quickly as we can. Next song they stand, we're out. Right? We don't want that. We want that place where people can come and think, hey, I don't even necessarily believe everything they believe, but man, I feel like I belong. I don't necessarily know everything they're talking about when it comes to faith and when it comes to Jesus, and they talk about prayer and different things that may seem a little off at times, but I want to learn more. That's an environment that lets people know that we are for them. And so the last couple of weeks, we've just been kind of looking at a couple of different phrases that I think we can incorporate into our life and an environment that we want to develop here at the church as well. 2 weeks ago, we looked at the fact that everyone matters. Everyone matters to God. And so everyone should matter to us. We may disagree, we may not land on the same page on certain things, but we still want to have that first place of understanding that you matter to God. Last week we then looked at the second element that I think creates an environment that people want to belong, where we openly stand up and just admit, listen, hey, nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect, right? Because when you just get that out in front, you recognize that, hey, listen, I've got mistakes, I've got mess ups, I got hang ups, I got issues. Yeah, good, you belong, because so do we, right? When you step into a place and you think, oh my goodness, I got to behave a certain way, I got to act like I have it all together, those people you can leave right now, right? It's this idea that we don't have it all together, and that's why we come. Because we recognize our need for Jesus. Those just real quick kind of dive in. So if you want to learn a little bit more about what we've been talking about, you can always jump back onto our website, click on Watch Sunday's message, and you can get caught up to speed. But this morning we're going to look at this final element. And believe me, there's much more to it. But it's this idea that anything is possible. Anything is possible. You see, what's amazing is that when you read the Bible and you read about some of these just incredible miracles, some of the things that God has done, there's this moment where you may think, wow, that is awesome. Probably not going to happen to me though, right? And we start to distance ourselves from the God of the Bible that is the same God at work in our lives as well, right? The same God that Moses prayed to, that David prayed to, that the disciples hung out with, it's the same God that we pray to. That's the same promises that Jesus gives to us as well. This sense of anything is possible. Now listen, this isn't just kind of like a rah, 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 like we're going to try harder. We're gonna do our best. No. That's not what this was about. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper and start to understand, okay, how does this work? How do we come to a place where we create an environment where we say anything is possible? Now, there's a good chance some of you here this morning are like, that's a great line and all, but you don't know what I'm dealing with right now, right? I've got a problem, or I've got a decision, or I'm dealing with something in my family or in my own life. You know, I'm struggling with grief, I'm struggling with disappointment. Let's just categorize all of that as saying, I have a mountain in my life that I don't think is going to be moved. And if that's you, good. Just hold on to that for a moment, because we're going to come back and look at what are some of the practical realities of this. If you're thinking, hey, listen, I'm happy to hear you out. I don't really have a mountain in my life. I don't really have any big issue that I'm kind of worried about or concerned about or doubting about. That's good as well, because in a few minutes, I'm going to give you a mountain to think about. All right? So either way, we're going to be covered here this morning. And so to kind of help us out, we're going to jump back into the Bible and an experience that Jesus had with his disciples. And we're going to pull out what I think is the great principle of it, and then we're going to apply it into our lives, into terms of what does the mountain look like. And so we just read it, Vivian just read it, but if you want to kind of review or put some notes, it's Matthew chapter 17. So if you don't have a Bible, you want to look at a Bible, listen, we got Bibles in pews if you want to swipe there. If you don't have a Bible, I say this every once in a while, we would love to give you one. And so you can either take one of the Bibles you find in the pews. You can, if you don't want one of those, you can always go over to the welcome table. We have other Bibles over there as well. Listen, they do much better in your house, in your hands, than just simply hanging out here for an hour on a Sunday morning. So please feel free to take it. But we're going to jump back into this story. And it's Matthew chapter 17. And let me just give you a little bit of context. Right? Because sometimes we jump into a passage and we need to understand kind of what happened before and then what happens afterwards. But it's fairly late into Jesus' ministry, right? And at this point in time, Jesus has been away with 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John. These guys have all been away with Jesus up on a mountain. I'm not going to go into that. You want to read about it. It's just the passage right before. And so the other 9, right? There was 12 disciples, 12 individuals that Jesus spent the most time with. And they became the leaders of the early church. So there's 12 of them. So 3 of them with Jesus and 9 of them are on their own. And while the 9 are on their own, a man, a father, who is completely overwhelmed by the condition of their son comes to these disciples. The problem is his son is having seizures that we read later on is because of an evil spirit within him. And as a result of these seizures, this boy is throwing himself into water, is being thrown into fires, and this is incredibly harmful. And so this father is just losing his mind. Imagine that. Right? As parents, you see your kids suffering. You will do anything and everything for them. And so this father brings his boy to these 9 disciples to see if they can do something for his son. And they can't. They can't. So that's where we pick up the story here this morning. Jesus is now back with his disciples. All 12 of them are together. He's come down from the mountain, and the Father finds Jesus. And while Jesus is walking along, he brings the boy to Jesus. And he says, listen, can you heal my son? He has seizures. He gets thrown into fire and into water. Can you please heal my son? And then he says something interesting. This is where I got the background from. He says, I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't do anything. And then Jesus kind of makes some interesting comments, right? In verse 17, he says, oh, unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me. And so Jesus casts out the demon, and the boy is healed. But then there's an interesting conversation, because as the crowds go away, Jesus is now left with his 12. And the 9 who couldn't heal this boy go up to Jesus and say, hey, listen, why couldn't we, emphasis we, why couldn't we do this? And then listen to what Jesus says, because this is, I think, significant for us in terms of how it applies to our lives. Jesus says, because you had so little faith, I tell you the truth, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed. Now, I'm not sure how many gardeners are out there, but a mustard seed in Jesus' day was likely the smallest known seed, right? Any seed is small, right? End of the day. But Jesus is saying, if you take the smallest seed, he says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing is impossible for you. Now, Jesus is not literally saying, listen, if you have faith, if you want to test out your faith, you can say to this literal massive mountain in front of you, move from here to there, right? It's a saying that Jesus uses. It's imagery that Jesus does. In the same way that we say things just to emphasize what's going on, right? If someone has a real difficult time to get to your place and they show up and look all exhausted, you're like, wow, like how is your trip? Like, I had to move heaven and earth to get here, right? Nobody believes you actually moved heaven and earth, right? Or if you have a massive rainfall, massive downpour, it's like, oh, and is it raining outside? It's like, oh man, it's raining cats and dogs. You don't like run to the window and be like, I want to see the Doberman fall, right? Like, you don't do that, right? That's the same thing Jesus is saying. It's not a literal, I'm going to move this mountain, but it's an image. Because in Jesus' day, often difficulties and challenges and huge obstacles would be described as a mountain. And so it's kind of puzzling what Jesus says, right? Because the disciples come to him and say, why couldn't we do it? And Jesus says, well, because you had little faith. Okay, if he would have just left it there, it would have been a lot easier to explain this. But he doesn't. He then says, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed. What? Are we splitting hairs? Like little faith? Small faith? Like, what is the deal? And I believe the point that Jesus is making as you go back into the story and you start to notice some of the subtleties around it, you come to the place of understanding what Jesus is talking about. Two things to notice. The first one is this. Notice it was the man who brought his son to Jesus, right? It was the man who brought the son to Jesus. If you go back a little bit further, it's not as if this was beyond what the disciples could do, right? A fair response to this would be like, well, that's totally unfair for his disciples. Like who can heal people? Who can cast out evil spirits? Yes, Jesus, you can do it, but surely these guys can't. But if you fall all the way back to Matthew chapter 10, there's a place where Jesus gives authority and power to his disciples to do exactly this. He says, I've given you power and authority to cast out evil spirits and to heal the sick. And so it's not as if they were unable. There's something that is missing. And I think the part that's missing is found, first of all, in the fact that it is the Father who comes to Jesus. It's interesting to note that if the disciples fell down, why didn't they suddenly, when Jesus came back to them, say, listen, we saw this father, we saw his sick son, we were praying for him, we were doing something for him, but it wasn't working. Jesus, you got to come. Jesus, you got to get in on this, right? The disciples just kind of left it. They tried it, and then they left it. And then the second thing is the language the disciples use. That after they see that Jesus healed this man, the response is, why couldn't we do it? Why couldn't we do it? And here I think is the point that Jesus is making. Is that in understanding anything is possible, in understanding this faith that he is talking about, the key is not about us trying harder. It's about us recognizing the need to bring everything to Jesus. Everything to Jesus. The question isn't how great is your faith, how much you believe. Because let's be honest, everybody has faith. We either believe in God, we believe in ourselves, we believe in something else, but we all believe in something. And so I believe the point that Jesus is making is, what do you believe in? What is the object of your faith? What is the foundation of your faith? Because that, you want to move mountains? That is what's most important. Thought I'd do a little demonstration for you this morning. And after last week, I thought I'm probably not going to get a volunteer up here again. If you weren't here last week, I almost threw darts at someone. So just go back, watch the video. But let me demonstrate this here, okay? The idea that it's the foundation of your faith that is most important, right? It's what are you basing your life upon? What are you basing your confidence and your trust upon? And so imagine this is the foundation of my faith. And I believe in this, I know this, and I believe that this is going to stand. I'm going to stand on this, and it's going to support me 100%. I don't want any doubters in the crowd. You do not doubt. You believe this is going to make me stand. Because I believe. I have huge faith. This is the foundation of my faith. And I'm going to stand, and it's going to hold me. But I believed, right? But the foundation was terrible. Let's try something else. I'm not so sure about this one. I don't think it's going to work. Right? I've already fallen once. And you're now telling me that if I just simply believe in God, that things might go differently? No. I don't really believe. Does anyone else want to come up here and give it a shot? Anyone? Believe this is going to hold them? No? All right. Well, if I'm going to give it a shot. I'm just going to give it a shot and see what happens. I hope it works. I really hope it works. What do you know? Too bad I have better balance, eh? Like you can jump on this, you can do it, I can join other people in this, right? The reality, and that for me was just helpful to understand the fact that it's not the amount of faith that we have. That's not what Jesus is saying. It's just believe in yourself more, right? Jesus is not a great moral teacher who just says, believe in yourself more. Believe that you can do it. He's not a self-help guru. He's like, believe in me. Make me the foundation of your faith. And even if you have a little faith the size of a mustard seed, it'll work. You see, following Jesus doesn't mean that we don't have doubts. It doesn't mean that we don't have uncertainties. It doesn't mean that there's times where we're going to think, I am not sure how this is going to work out. It's not like Jesus says, come to me only once you have perfect faith. Once you believe 100% that I'm going to do what you've asked me to do, Jesus says, come and see. Come and believe. That's why Jesus always says, follow me, believe in me, have faith in me. It's interesting, if you start to look at the way that Jesus talks, he's always talking about himself because he's God. And he wants people to put their faith in him. And so I believe what Jesus is teaching his disciples, what Jesus is teaching us, is what is most important is the object of your faith, is making Jesus the foundation of your faith. He says, then when you trust in me, then you'll be able to move mountains. I think the difficulty for the disciples was they thought it was all up to them. They thought it was all up to what they needed to do. And Jesus is like, no. It comes through believing in me. This very similar account is told in Mark's gospel. And Mark actually talks about the importance of prayer. Again, reminding us of the importance of bringing it back to God. So let's get practical. What does this start to look like? I would suggest two things. The first one is that this requires an action. Maybe you've heard of the saying, you got to take a step of faith, or you have to take a leap of faith. I'm going to give you a different phrase. Plant a seed of faith in Jesus. Right? Jesus talks about a mustard seed. It can be a little amount, but plant your faith in Jesus and begin to see how it'll grow. You see, God values partnership. God values in working with us. That's why Jesus earlier on had given his disciples power and authority to heal as he did. But he didn't want his disciples to just think, okay, we've got this magical ability, we've got this special power, now we can just do our own thing. No, it's this partnership of us stepping out and planting seeds of faith, but also believing that God has to show up, or none of it's going to work. And so will we plant seeds of faith? Will we take steps of faith where we know that there's things that we need to do, but ultimately God has to show up? Second thing is an understanding that ultimately the results are up to God. Right? Faith is not saying, God, you do exactly what I want to do. That's not faith, that's manipulation. And then sometimes it works the reverse way, is that if we're praying earnestly, it is so unhelpful to say to a person, well, it must be something about your faith. No. There's so many examples in the scriptures where people may pray and people may ask, and it doesn't always go according to plan, and that's where the trust comes in. Because we've planted our seeds in Jesus. And we leave the results up to him. I'm continually reminded of this, particularly with the work that I'm involved in Malawi. As many of you know, we've spent over 4 years there, and now I'm involved primarily in prison ministry. And we were there in 2015. We were visiting 2 prisons weekly. So about 300 to 400 people every week. We'd go and we'd do Bible studies. We'd go and we'd deliver basic necessities like soap and medicine and bed mats. And things were going really well. And then one of my volunteers named Rami had a crazy idea. I was about 4 months away from leaving, coming back to all you beautiful people. And he comes up to me and he says, hey, we should start visiting more prisons. We should visit more prisons. I'm like, that's a lovely idea, but Rami, I'm leaving in 4 months. I'm the only one with a vehicle. We're not going to get to these other prisons. Rami, we don't have a budget for any of this. How is this going to work? And it was like we. And the dude stopped me in my tracks. And he's like, let's just take a step of faith and see what God's going to do. I'm like, how do you respond to that? He's like, let's just plant a seed. And so we started visiting 3 more prisons, right? We planted a seed to see what was going to happen. And then I'm still thinking in my mind, okay, but we don't have a budget. I'm leaving in a few months. Where are we going to go? And then I got this idea of, why don't I ask my national church to see if I can continue to partner with them? Why don't I ask these amazing people in Paris if they will give me up, for various weeks throughout the year, not sure what was going to happen. We still didn't have a budget. Well, jump forward to 2019. We're now visiting 14 prisons weekly. 2,800 men and women are hearing more and more about the good news of Jesus, are receiving basic necessities like soap and medicine. We're developing new programs within the prisons. In 2015, if we showed up to a prison, the authority is like, no. You're not allowed in here. We are not having you come in here. Now, they are writing us letters and calling us and saying, why aren't you in our prisons yet? We're getting an open invitation. But like a seed, when you plant it in Jesus, it begins to grow. Not only in terms of what you're doing, but it also begins to grow in you. And so back to your situation. Maybe you have a mountain here today. I hope that you believe that anything is possible. Not because I'm going to tell you to try harder, but turn your focus to Jesus. I realize that so often in my own life, I can get so caught up in the things and the mountains and the problems of life that I even fail to forget to bring God into the conversation. And what does it start to look like? Just plant that seed in him. And say, this is my mountain, this is my difficulty, this is my challenge, this is my disappointment, this is whatever it may be. And then begin to allow God to be at work in you. Those of you without a mountain here this morning, let me give one to you. It's the mountain of this building. As many of you know, the last number of years, we've been talking about the challenges and the decision that needs to be made. And when we start to look at the numbers, and we start to think about the decision, it can be overwhelming. At least that's how I feel at times. But then I'm reminded of the God of the Bible, of what God wants to do not only in our lives, but also through our lives as well. And so I'll be the first to say, I don't know exactly how this is going to play out. I don't know exactly how the funds are going to come in. I don't know exactly all the details. And that's probably a pretty darn good thing. But God does. And God knows the details of your stories as well. And so will you trust in him? Bring your doubts. Bring your uncertainties. Bring your confusion. Bring your hurt. Bring your disappointment, but stand upon him. Make Jesus the foundation of your faith. Plant a seed and see what he is going to do. Invite the musicians to come up. We're just going to sing a song, and then we're going to intentionally pray for our church and for whatever you may be facing here this morning.